Hey everybody, welcome back to University Lutheran and our confirmation study, and specifically looking at our 100 Bible stories. Today we're taking a look at the second of the 100 Bible stories, which also happens to be the second story in the stories about creation. And so what we're talking about today specifically are the days that are day 5 through day 7 of creation. And those are important days, not that the other days aren't important, but these are important days for different reasons. One of the big things that is super important about these days is what happens on the sixth day, where God creates human beings. And if you look in the scriptures, it will actually say, "Let us create." Now that might be kind of confusing because you might go, "Well, God is one person," but God is one person, one being actually, but He's actually three persons. And so when we begin worship together, when we say, "In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit," what we're saying there is that God is one God, but He has these three distinct persons in Him. So we as human beings have one being and one person. That's just how we know life. But for God, it's a different way of knowing life. He has one being, but He has three persons, and those three persons are the Father, who basically takes care of creation, the Son, who takes care of redemption. He's the one who becomes Jesus and then dies on the cross and saves us from our sin, and the Holy Spirit, the one who sanctifies us, makes us holy, makes us better than what we were. And so he says, "Let us," and he's meaning all three people of the Trinity there. It's also a way of talking about God in Hebrew. The old Hebrew, the original language here is Elohim, which means God and plural. And so there is also that sense of that just God is so big, God is so great that a singular sort of idea of Him doesn't fit. So you go with the plural of that idea. Then he goes and he says, "Let us make them in our image." Now that doesn't necessarily mean that we look like God. It doesn't necessarily mean that God has, two eyes and one nose and one mouth. It doesn't necessarily mean that God has two arms and two legs. What it means instead is that God is putting us in relationship to the rest of the world in the same way that He has relationship with the world. And so what He's saying when He's saying that we are in His image, it's basically like saying we're His ambassadors. We're the people that stand in terms of the rest of creation as God's representatives to creation, which is why it was such a bad thing when we first sinned, and we'll talk about that later, but why it was such a bad thing when we first sinned that we actually hurt all of creation around us. That when we sin, we actually hurt trees and animals and stuff like that. It's kind of crazy if you think about it. But that is what happens because God said, "You are not only just some creatures that I created. You're not like platypi. You're not like chickens. You're not like dogs, but rather you are my representatives." And so when Jesus forgives us, when Jesus redeems us, when we go through our baptisms, what it means for us is that notion of our relationship with the world is being restored through Jesus, and that Jesus is the ultimate in that restoration, that through Jesus we actually do have somebody who stands in relationship to the rest of creation as God's representative. But then, as people who follow Jesus, as people who are baptized into His name, we then also are people that are called to then be God's representative to the rest of creation. And that includes, plants and animals and other people as well. And so that's two of the big important things about this second half of the story of creation is that God is a triune being. He has one being, but He has three persons. And then that we are created in His likeness, that we are created to be not just people that kind of look like God, which is what people normally think, but rather people that look to everybody else as God's representatives, as God's ambassadors. And so that's who we are. So what I'd like you to do, just to make sure that I know that you took a look at this video and that you're tracking along with this, is I would like you to tell me what it is about this story that stands out to you most? And that's, there's not going to be one right answer. And some of our questions are going to be like that sometimes. So just look at the story again and say, tell me, what is the thing that stands out to you most? What is the thing that you go, whoa, that's kind of amazing, or that's kind of cool, or this just kind of caught my eye? So go ahead and do that down in the comments, and we'll catch you for story number 3 in just a little while.